Welcome to Season 5 of WitchLit, a place to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. We're excited to be back and share so many great episodes with you this season, including Marshall, the Witch of Southern Light, Morpheus Ravina, Christopher Hughes, Thorne Mooney, Stacey Thomas, Aaron Oberon, and many more. We'll also have more special seasonal episodes along the way. And if you like what we're doing here, please consider giving us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm sure you've heard many other podcasters say it 100 times before, but it really does bump up the show in search algorithms and make it easier for other witches to find us. Thank you for listening. Now let's dive into Season 5. JD Walker is an avid student of herbalism and gardening. She's written a regular garden column for over 30 years. She's an award-winning author, journalist, and magazine editor, and a frequent contributor to the Llewellyn Annuals. Her first book, A Witch's Guide to Wildcrafting, Uncommon Magic with Common Plants, published by Llewellyn Worldwide, was released in spring 2021. Her new book, Under the Sacred Canopy, A Search for the Universe Tree, is out now. JD Walker, welcome to WitchLit.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks for being on. When your first book came out, I heard your interview with Corey over at New World Witchery and bought the book immediately. So I was excited that you had another one coming out.
Wonderful. I hope the first book was of use to you.
It was. So, yeah. So our first question for everybody on the show in this age of, lots of different ways to communicate and everything, why write still? Why write books?
I write books. That's interesting. There was a point in time that I was concerned that books would end up back in some dusty museum and we just wouldn't have them anymore. And when I was working at the newspaper, there was a lady who very early on picked up on the habit of reading on a Kindle. And I watched her for several years. That was her thing to do in the break room when she would take her breaks. She would be on her Kindle doing something. And then about 2005 or so, I guess it was, I noticed that she started bringing books back in again. And then I started hearing stories about people were tired of looking at a computer screen, which makes plenty of sense to me. I spent 8 hours a day on a computer screen working at the newspaper. I certainly did not want to go home and look at a computer screen whenever I got home for my own leisure. The other thing was we had a bookstore here in our area, very popular used bookstore. And again, I noticed there for a while, it seemed to be focusing more on video games and CDs and things of that sort. And then suddenly they just exploded with people coming in and wanting books. So I think the reason why we still write books is that it is a tangible thing. It is a leisurely thing. It is a comforting thing. I think that reading, much like writing, if you will do it, helps you to calm down, helps you to focus. It's right there. If you happen to get distracted, you go right back to it. It's just a very comforting thing to have and a good thing to keep your brain focused and keep you organized and keep you more settled, more at ease, I think, than constantly flicking through computer screens.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I go back and forth. I read a lot of paperbacks and hardcover books, mostly paperbacks. I'm kind of cheap. But I read a lot of ebooks too, just because it's easier to get them from the library and, stuff like that. So I kind of go back and forth, but I have found it's better for me if I read a real book in bed, because when the lights go out, I have to go to sleep. So.
Well, and they keep telling us that the blue light, even if you do one of those screen adaptions to reduce the blue light, is not good for you. It keeps your brain too wired. And heaven knows I am an avid reader of history and of course plant material and news article. I'm a news junkie, have always been. So having that resource that you can get into libraries in California, for instance, that has a copy of a book and frequently will have it online that you can scroll through it. Internet Archive. Oh my God. I don't know how much stuff I have read on Internet Archive. Yeah. It's a wonderful resource. I just think that at the end of the day, if I have it on my shelf, I feel secure. It's
Mhm.
there, it's mine, it's never going away.
Yeah, especially Internet Archive right now with all the legal stuff they've been going through. I've been heavily using them for some research I'm doing for a book. And I was like, am I going to have to go buy these books because they're not going to be
Oh
available?
my God.
So,
Well, some of the books, like for instance, with Under the Sacred Canopy, there is an Australian author wrote a wonderful book, great information, 400 and some pages long. And if I tried to buy it, it would cost me over $200.
mhm. Yeah.
There's no way you put two or three of those together and suddenly you're bankrupt.
Yeah.
But if I can get to it, at least parts of it online, I can save a lot of money. And when I can, I love to go ahead and pay like a one-day subscription
Mhm.
to like the Cambridge University site or some of these other sites, just to help them along too, because I certainly
Yeah.
don't want them to go away.
Yeah, I know. And I was really grateful that so many libraries opened up a lot of stuff available at home during the pandemic that they've kept. So if you have a library card, you can log into some of those databases from home, which is really nice. And has been helpful as a writer, as I'm sure has been for you to have access to those things. So
Definitely.
so you spent a lot of time writing journalism. So what was the impetus to write a book for you? What was the leap?
Well, the first book, The Witch's Guide to Wildcraft, was something that I had talked to a friend about. She owns a New Age shop up here in my area, and at that particular time, this was like 20 years ago, and the concept for that particular book came up because I wanted to help people who maybe were cash strapped but wanted to pursue a pagan type practice to find plants in their immediate area that they could harvest and dry and process to keep for their practice and not sit there going, I can't get these herbs, can't afford to buy this particular material. So I can't do my practice, or I can't do it in a way that I feel is honoring. So I was flipping through a Scott Cunningham book, looking at all of his herbs, thinking I can grow or access 60 to 70% of these herbs right here in my immediate area. It's one of the benefits of living in my area. We can grow a lot of things. So that was the first step. And then it was the realization, because I've been a gardener for a significant part of my life, it was, yes, I can do that and I can tell people to go get them, but frequently they don't have a whole lot of expertise when it comes to common gardening things. Like I could tell you to go out and get some pieces off of a spiny holly. But if you don't do that in a respectful way, you harm the plant.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to the second idea for the book, was to get you out into nature so that you could relate to nature in a respectful way and honor her. It gets you more in tune with the herbs or the plants you're trying to use, and gives you a greater respect for deity or for the spiritual realm when you suddenly stop thinking of everything as human centric. If it wasn't for humans, then the world wouldn't exist. Well, the world will go along just fine after we're dead and gone.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it won't be anytime soon, but it gets you back to that idea that we are all part of this great big system, and we need to be a part of it respectfully in order to carry out our spiritual traditions.
Yeah. I know it's funny you said that about, when we're gone. My dad always used to say that eventually the earth would shake us off like a case of fleas. It's one of his favorite things to say. And I don't know, it's oddly comforting in a way, I guess, as a witchy type person, that, yes, we are not the most important thing on this planet by far. We just think we are.
The thing that I have found interesting since writing the book, because the Under the Sacred Canopy was a bit of an extension from The Witch's Guide to Wildcraft, and I wanted to explain to people how significant trees have been in human history through all of this time. We relate to them on so many different ways. Spirits in the trees, trees as concepts for knowledge, for wisdom, as conduits for contact to the spiritual realm, as concepts for how the whole world is and where we are supposed to fit in it. And I've been very amused to hear people when we will talk about the book, and they're very gracious when we talk about the book, talk about the trees, and they say, okay, now we want to talk about plants. Trees are plants.
Yes.
They're not two separate things. So in my mind, the Under the Sacred Canopy is kind of an extension of the Witch's Guide to Wildcraft. And I'm hoping to encourage people to broaden their horizon, so to speak, to include trees in their interactions as they go out into the wild.
Mm-hmm. So in doing the research, for folks who haven't read the book, JD covers, I guess, lots of, like you said, lots of different spiritual trees, like real trees that were honored, as well as metaphorical trees in lots of different traditions across the world. In doing the research, which I imagine was a lot to do those, because you're talking about a lot of different cultures. Was there one that you came across that just really spoke to you in a way that surprised you? Or like, what did the research look like? I mean, were there any surprises for you doing the research?
To be honest with you, one of the ones that I found that was most fascinating, simply because I didn't expect to encounter it, was when I was doing the research for the universe tree. And what I call the universe tree, a lot of people call world tree or axis mundi, or there's some other names for it. But I call it universe tree because world tree doesn't really speak to what that concept is anymore. When the ancients were looking at their world, they had a flat plane of the world with a dome sky and some mysterious area underneath, and the whole universe, the stars and the planets and everything, were all part of a compact unit. Modern people don't look at it that way. When they say world, they mean Earth, and that's it. So if you want to include the celestial bodies and metaphysical spiritual bodies and the underworld, you have to kind of broaden that term. So that's why I use universe tree. But as I was doing that, of course, we know about Yggdrasil. Most people do know about the Nordic tree. And I was familiar with like Irmisil, the Germanic tree that connects everything together. I did not expect to find a universe tree in Central America. When you go to the Central America, Aztecs, Mayans, some of the other cultures in that area had a very complex universe tree. It was one that, like Yggdrasil, connects the upper spiritual world with the mundane world and with an underworld. They had that, but they have a broader concept of additional trees that anchored the four corners of the world. Their upper body includes 13 different layers, and depending on your life habits in this world, you might end up on one of those layers. You would never end up on the very top layer that was reserved for the major deities. And then in the underworld, there were, I believe it's 8 layers that you had to go through in the underworld to get to the end there, where depending on the culture, some say you simply pass to oblivion, and others indicate that you might be able to go to a spiritual realm where your children and grandchildren could still contact you. It kind of depends on which culture you're looking at. Yeah. But that one was the most intriguing to me as I did the different researches for all the different concepts of this that I could come across.
Well, it was interesting to me to read those because I was not familiar with some of those either, reading the book, and to just think about, the human experience of living with these beings, right? Of living with trees and kind of the awe that they, like, I mean, moving to California, like the first weekend I think we were here, we drove to one of the redwood groves because I was like, I just want to go, and we go a lot because it's a magical place for me, and to just be in the presence of these enormous ancient trees and to have that, it's no wonder that people across the world in different cultures, incorporate trees into their spiritual beliefs, because they are kind of Yeah. I mean,
they are ubiquitous. I mean,
yeah.
there are very few places that you can go that there are no trees.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you get into the polar regions, you get into that. You get into Siberia, and it's more shrubby than tree form. But there are very few places that you can go that don't have some sort of trees. And if they've got trees, they have a system of venerating them.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the tradition. Some of them didn't have quite the focus on them, but they always had stories about trees inhabited by spirits or trees sacred to some particular deity or group of special spiritual entities. Some of them good, some of them a little scary. To know which one was which so that you didn't get into trouble. But I mean, that to me is amazing that you can go all around the world. If we're looking for some sense of commonality, it is amazing to me that you can go all around the world and find those same beliefs. It doesn't matter if you are in North America or in Egypt or in Asia. There is that veneration of trees, and that at least is something that we have in common with all of the strangers that are out there in the globe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also loved how many different stories there were about trees you were not supposed to sleep underneath for various incendiary reasons. Yeah.
One that I thought was interesting was in the Native American traditions of not wanting to sleep under magnolia trees. That one, it kind of reminded me of my mother, who absolutely loved magnolia trees, but could not stand the smell of them. There was just no way.
Yeah.
And the idea of the hawthorn tree in Victorian times, and if you go back far enough, they're very strongly associated with fairies and those kinds of wood nymph spirits. But in Victorian times, you didn't really want it around because it reminded them the smell of death. So it was not a positive thing. If you had it, it was just carrying it to the graveside and dropping it into the loved one's grave before it was covered over. So, yeah, there are a number of them that you don't want to be around. And of course, there's frequent stories in the Greek and Roman mythology where some poor, unsuspecting soul accidentally or sometimes on purpose harms a tree that turns out to be occupied by a dryad or one of the other spirits. The tree begins to bleed, and that person is doomed at that point. And I always wondered, how would you know? Was that just a cultural structure to remind people don't go around randomly hurting trees because you never know whenever one might curse you? What was the motivation behind that? But there are plenty of those stories, so it must have been a very strong motivation.
Yeah. And I think about actually one of the first people I interviewed for the show was Penny Billington, and her book that came out, was it last year? Time is irrelevant these days. Was 9 Ways to Charm a Dryad. It was basically how to make friends with trees. And it's a lovely book for people who haven't read it. But it is kind of just as a way to approach a tree to find out, does the tree want to be friends with you? Is it receptive to that? And what can we learn from them, kind of thing. And I think about that a lot. One of the jokes I have made about moving to California is everything feels like a movie set here in a lot of ways, because, there's a lot of non-native plantings. We talked a little bit about this before we got started recording. And it's just odd to me, especially growing up in East Tennessee and being close to the woods, as a child my whole life, and, climbing up inside trees, and here, to be looking out and there's royal palm trees. And I'm like, how? It's just a strange existence. Yeah. And I'm like, you don't belong here. How'd you get here? So, yeah.
Out of curiosity, when you were growing up in Tennessee, what was your favorite tree to climb?
Oh, so I had 2. At our house, we had a dogwood that had split really low to the ground. And I think there's a picture of all of us as when we lived in that house as young children in that tree. And then all my nieces and nephews in that tree. So it's like the perfect tree to climb when you were really small. And then the other tree I really liked, we had white pines planted behind the house that our neighbors had planted. And I loved to climb those. Those are the best climbing trees when you're a kid, because You're just in your own little world inside those trees.
That exactly the same with me. When I grew up in Catawba County, which is foothills of the mountains on our side, so we had great, huge, giant white pine trees, and the scaffolding on those makes it so easy to climb. And like you said, you got up there, you could see the whole world. It smelled like pine. I just absolutely loved it. My brother had a favorite, one of my brothers had a favorite oak tree to climb because it had, in a storm, it gotten bent over and just grew like that. So you could just about walk up without any difficulty. And he was a little monkey, so he scampered up that thing with no problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
But for me, it was always the white pines. And of course, then you go home and mama's mad at you because you got pine rosin all over your clothes,
Yes.
all over your hands.
In your hair. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember that too.
Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah. We also had at the house where I grew up, we're on Wattsbar Lake, which is a man-made lake and then TVA dam system. And there was this huge oak tree that was right on the edge of the water, and it had been struck by lightning multiple times. When we first moved there, I think in like 1975, it was alive, but it had been struck by lightning several times because it was the tallest tree around for, miles, I think. Yes. And it died, sometime in my early childhood, and just was this giant dead tree because it was huge and it was far enough away from the house. It wasn't a danger to us. And if it had fallen, it probably would have fallen into the water. But I just that stark outline of that dead oak tree is such a weird like image of my childhood of just that tree.
Do you ever, because we would have trees come down in the storm, and then of course my grandmother heated with wood, and she would selectively cut trees and wouldn't necessarily get to them quickly to get them cut up. And one of the favorite games that my brothers and I had was playing tag on the trees, and it's kind of a variation of the floor is lava. You could go anywhere on the tree, but you couldn't get off of the tree. And we played tag, trying to scamper around this tree without ever stepping off. And that was just wonderful. You could go all around on these branches all over the place. It was just so much fun.
Yeah. I don't know. It was kind of magical to be a kid, growing up in the woods like that. I mean, we were close to the lake. We had woods behind us, and then my parents had a big garden. And I remember my brother and I found a persimmon tree, and did not know about that it needed a frost before you ate one, and turned our mouths inside out with persimmon.
But, you can do that. And what is the cure for that? Do you remember what the cure for that is?
No, we just spit a lot. I don't know.
They never told you the cure.
No.
The cure for that is a big tablespoon of sugar.
Oh, yeah, no, they were just like, it was the 70s. So they just like threw us out in the morning and just come back before dark kind of thing. So
as long as you came back home, that's okay.
As long as you came back before dark. And we couldn't go to the water by ourselves. That was the other rule. We couldn't go to the lake by ourselves. So, because I think my mom was really afraid one of us would drown.
We had a river. It was probably about a half to 3/4 miles away from the house. No, you don't go to the river. Go play in the creek, or as we used to call it growing up, the branch. But you weren't allowed to go to the river.
Yeah. I don't. I'm sure we broke that rule multiple times, but I don't remember ever getting in trouble for it because it was a man-made lake. Like the water would go down in the winter, and that was our favorite thing was to go walk along the shore and see what we could find. And the water had gone down, so it was always an adventure. But yeah, so I'm curious, like kind of to get back to the writing of the book, like. Do you have a tree that looms large, like in your own practice as an adult, I guess?
For me, and I really don't know why, I love all kinds of trees. Oak trees are marvelous. But one that I'm particularly drawn to is the beech tree, and it may be because I'm a writer. There's some speculation that our word for book comes from the Old English word for beech. And I love the way they look. They're huge and stately. And there's one in particular on this property where I live, where the roots I mean, a lot of tree roots kind of take on that boa constrictor look, huge, snaky look. The way that beech tree roots grow is they can sometimes kind of grow over one another or very close to one another. And this one has a root configuration that you can lay down, and there's a place for your legs, there's a place for your arms out to the side. You can lay your head, it feels like you're laying your head in the lap of the beech tree, and
wow.
look up into the sky, listen to the wind blow through the leaves, and just watch the clouds float by in between the leaves. That one to me, I call her Queen of the Woods, or Mother Beech, because in so many of the trees, they have a male identity or a male association, but she is a queen all on her own.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. I love this idea of a tree making a place for you. That's
Yes,
really nice.
And it's a great place for meditation. Some of the early efforts I made at soul journeying were made that way. And it's just a very good way to connect with the tree to get where you need to go if you're doing that kind of journey work.
So I'm curious, when you started writing the book, or when you start writing in general, like, where did you start with this project? Like, how did you decide the parameters? I mean, I feel like, you could start writing about trees and never stop.
No, that's true. The part of the motivation, the main focus when I started out was the universe tree, because this was about 6 or 7 years ago. And not to disparage the memory of the gentleman Rodney King, is most often remembered for his quote, "Can't we all just get along?" And in the political turmoil that was really beginning to fester at that time, and as continues, unfortunately, for today, that was a constant question for me. Can we not just get along? Is there not something that could make us feel a sense of commonality that wouldn't threaten us, that wouldn't define us as red or blue or liberal or conservative or anything like that? Just something that we could come together on and say that this is a source of commonality. So I was immediately fascinated with the universe tree. And as I worked to develop that concept, I realized I needed to segregate universe tree from other kinds of trees, like the trees of wisdom and the trees of life, which a lot of times people will conflate. They're not the same thing. They're very important in history, but they're not the same thing. So for me, it was starting with that basic premise and getting into it and going, oh, okay, I can't talk about this unless I also talk about this. And if I'm going to talk about this, then I probably need to bring in these other things. So the project just starts to grow over time. And like you said, if you're not careful, it can just completely get out of hand. I'm one of those people that kind of, I will research stuff till freezes over because there's always something else you could read. There's always something else that you want to go, oh, but I could cite this thing in here too. Where can I jam this in? And you end up cutting it out because you really did jam it in there and it was not appropriate. So usually I start with a concept. Occasionally I have a complete idea, as with the Witch's Guide to Wildcraft. I just submitted a proposal to Llewellyn to talk about something that I'm tentatively calling the mechanics of magic, to help people understand that a lot of what we call magic works frequently for very mundane reasons. And trying to get that outline done was like pulling teeth, because where are you going to go? You can go off in 50 different directions. And so I was trying to really boil that down to an essence, to an outline that would make sense to someone and something that you could build on. So my writing process, I'm usually pretty organized. I usually know where I'm going with something, what I want to put in there. But occasionally it can be overwhelming, and then I just get stuck. I just get frozen, and I have to put it in the back of my head and let it steep and cook for a while before I can actually start to get something on paper. And then when I get to that point, sometimes the best thing to do is just start writing. Just start writing. Let it start coming out, and you'll realize. In my case, I realize, oh, okay, I do have a solid structure for this. I might need to refine it, but I do have a solid structure. I just needed to get started, start putting that down on paper, start putting that down through the keyboard, and then let the process roll. I think anyone who has ever been a writer or aspires to be a writer might be pleasantly surprised at how they surprise themselves. When you're writing, oh man, this is a brilliant idea. I never intended for it to go this way, but look at how it's evolving, and I've got to run this on out to see how it finishes up evolving. I think that's a wonderful part of being a writer, when you can get so involved in your research and in your project that it takes on this life of its own and informs you as much as you are trying to inform someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm always surprised, like you said, about where things end up from where they started. They do seem to take a lift. I mean, I generally write fiction. I'm working on a nonfiction project right now, but I generally write fiction, and yeah, like it never quite happens the way I think it's going to happen. You know, always the scope or the story, always seems to change and grow. But you're right, it is real easy to like fall in love with an idea and realize it doesn't belong there. Like that to me is one of the hardest things as a writer to learn. It's like, just because you love it doesn't mean it belongs there. So
I'm telling you, a good editor is worth his or her weight in gold.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
I believe that with the newspaper, and I had good and bad editors at the newspaper. And I believe it with the books that I've written so far, because they can very firmly say, you don't need to be doing this, or, ooh, you need more of this. This is a great idea. Do more here. Things that maybe you hadn't really considered, or maybe you thought about them and you said, no, that'll never fly. I just won't do that. And you get that validation. Someone says, this is good. You need to expand this part of it. So
yeah,
I agree with you there.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I feel like learning to really trust your editor is like one of the things that will make you a better writer in the end, even though it's hard. I think, writers have both imposter syndrome and inflated egos at the same time. And it's easy to go, oh no, this is perfect. And then, an editor gets a hold of it and you get it back and it looks like someone bled all over it. And you're like, oh yeah, maybe it wasn't perfect.
I used to occasionally help with some of the interns we'd get at the newspaper. We didn't get a whole lot of them, but we did get some of them. And they would, bless their hearts, they would get so upset when somebody said, take this paragraph out, move this thing up here. Didn't tell me enough about that. And they would just be devastated. Look, don't marry your work. Please don't marry your work, because it's going to have to change whether you want it to or not. Might need to change because of size, format restrictions, or because it's not going the way the newspaper wanted it to. They wanted to talk about this and you're trying to talk about that. Whatever you do, when it comes to this sort of thing, do not marry your work.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like I've never written as a journalist, but I too am a news junkie. So I read a lot of news, and I mean, there's a very strict format for short form news. The most important facts go at the top, right? And then you can kind of, like, what can get cut kind of goes at the end. So I think, that's probably an adjustment. I mean, I assume for you, though, there was a bit of an adjustment from going from journalism writing to longer work. Was that tough to do, or not really?
To be quite honest, it was a little bit of an adjustment, because you do get accustomed to saying, I only have this much space. You're told repeatedly that readers' attention spans tend to be limited. Their time needs to be limited. They're reading this story maybe in between fixing the pot roast for dinner or on their lunch break, and they only have X amount of time. So you've got to get this stuff done. And I do sometimes feel forced to expand things more than I personally feel like they need. I'm comfortable with the things that I've had to do to expand work from time to time, but there's always this nagging doubt in the back of my mind that says, "Am I padding this? I'm sticking things in here just to be sticking something in to increase the page size." So yeah, that was a little bit of an adjustment as I was going to long projects. Fortunately, I had a couple of options. These are my books for Llewellyn, but I did some history books, local history books for the newspaper publication. I also did one. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the NASCAR driver Richard Petty. We put together a book, and it was a very personal one. It was not so sports related. I didn't get into his life as a driver, but more of his family life and what was going on behind the scenes when he was going through his career and to all these different races and stuff. So I got a little bit of experience before I launched full stream into writing books for broad publication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would imagine that it's helpful to make that jump, because I think about that. Like the listeners will know I did my master's degree in poetry, and now I write novels. And I will never be a doorstop writer because I just don't write really long. And I kid myself that I take the what is that, Elmore Leonard? Just don't write the parts that people skip anyway. Just leave that out. That's what I tell myself. But I think it's just that I'm just not a tome writer. That's not how I work.
I don't read these books. There's some of the ones on the popular shelf, who's it Critton and some other folks, they write books that are like 400, 500 pages long. And one of these days I'll sit down and read it and try to figure out what in the world they're trying to do. And obviously they're popular. Somebody likes it. I can't go on and on and on. I can't imagine trying to sustain a fiction story. One of these days I'll try and do a fiction book. I spend so much time reading history and archaeology and things of that sort that's my go-to. I very rarely read fiction because this is a wonderful story, but I want to read about the real life story. Yeah. I don't want to read about an imaginary situation between a struggling ruler and his paramour or something of that sort. I want to read the actual historical figures who went through that.
Yeah.
I'm much more comfortable in the nonfiction world than the fiction world.
Yeah. And I think, and I don't think you're unique. I know lots of people who mostly read nonfiction of, various stripes. And I think, I was such an escapist child, and I wasn't in the woods, I was reading. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of got hooked on fiction then because, I also really read the Laura Ingalls Wilder books when I was a kid. I loved those. And I know there's some issues with the Ingalls Wilders as an adult.
Historical act, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, historically there were some issues there, but those books opened a whole world to me. And those books are why I love to read history, because I love to read history, like you said, from a first person, either from one person's point of view and how this affected life. And, but I also I fell in love with fiction, and because it could take you somewhere you could never go on your, for real. I think that's true.
I spent a lot of time when I did read growing up. I read a lot of science fiction. Robert Heinlein was one of my favorite authors.
I also read a lot of Heinlein too. And then, again, you grow up and you're like, oh yeah, he's problematic.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm going to have to go back and look through it. Well, and to admit an embarrassing part, my mother and father were deeply into the detective novels written by Carter Brown and Mickey Spillane.
Oh, yeah.
But those were a little too racy. They wouldn't let the kids read those. Yeah. But there was a writer, his name was Richard Prather. He had kind of a spoof on detective novels at the time. And they were still the same idea. The main character was a detective. He was out in California and he solved crimes, but he was a little on the goofy side. There were still little bits of naughtiness, but not as much as you would find in Carter Brown and Mickey Spillane.
Yeah.
And I used to adore reading those things. But I pretty much left all that behind after I got out of the required reading in high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still like mysteries. Most of my really good writer friends are romance writers. And so I kind of have adopted romance reading as an adult because I read their books and I enjoy their books. I didn't really think I liked romance and I was like, oh, but I do, it's a good escape, but I still love mysteries and I love like weird, cozy mysteries. Like, like kind of the paranormal cozies I really like, but also just like weird situations that I would never have anything to do with, I just, and I really like Rita Mae Brown's cozies with the cats, which I think she's written like 30 of them at some time. I don't know. There's a bunch of them, but
I'm sure my sisters could tell you all about those. Both of my sisters love those. And when we go to that used bookstore I mentioned earlier, they come out with a basket full of whatever author they're fascinated with at the time. And I'm just amazed that these people can go on for, as you say, 20, 30 books using the same basic concept, but it's this kind of mystery this time, it's that kind of mystery the next time. And they just go on and on and on and on.
Yeah, sometimes it works. And then I had this series I will not name and shame, but that I've read since the first book. And I think she's on book 25 or 26. And I did not finish the last one because I was like, no, this is played out. And
wasn't the alphabet person, was it?
No. I have never read those. But I have a friend who read them for a long time and she said, yeah, they got kind of bad at the end. But it was disappointing because I feel like I've known these characters for a long time because she started writing these like in the 90s, right? And I've been reading them a long time. And I was just like, yeah, they haven't grown as people and it's boring now. Like I can't.
Well, I used to like to watch, there've been any number of adaptations of the Agatha Christie books. And I love some of the movies. I know Peter Ustinov was not the right body type for the Hercule Poirot series, but he did 2 or 3 movies. I absolutely loved them. I need to read these books. Oh my God, I could not read these books.
The books are very different. I do like the adaptation. So, and though the Kenneth Branagh adaptations are completely far afield, I have enjoyed them just because they, it's like, it reminds me of those like made for TV movies or movies that were on TV when I was a kid. I think some of them were theatrical releases, but just like those cast of thousands movies, like the Towering Inferno and stuff and so I'd like his movies for that because it's just like all of these actors and it's like the Knives Out and Glass Onion movies, that I love that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I want to see Knives Out. I haven't seen that one. They're on like the second or third.
Second one just came out. Yeah. Second one just came out. Yeah.
I
highly recommend.
But
they're
that
quite
one
good.
looks intriguing.
Yeah, they're quite good. If you're into that kind of thing, they're quite good. I can see how people would not enjoy them if that's not your thing. Yeah.
I spent so much time doing research for this book and for the other one that there for a while I had to get off. I had to get off of serious research. And one of my go-tos was these books that are just a compilation of weird historical facts. I love those things. And sometimes the blurbs are really short. There's one that I was called, there's an author out there whose name escapes me right now. It's has a whole series of don't know much about. And he does American history and some other key things that are fun. Bill Bryson, when he got into the history of everything, I mean, it's just 180 degrees from what I usually read and do. But things like that are good palate cleansers. They're good ways to let your mind just rest from having done history, mythology, and things of that sort, and just eat up something else for a while.
Well, and I think too, I've thought about this a lot because I read a lot for the podcast now, and I read a lot of like occult, witchy, pagan books for the podcast. And it's real easy to get into that trap if that's all you read, because that's all I have time to read in the months when I'm doing interviews. And, but I don't think it feeds, I don't think it feeds me as a writer to only do that. And I don't think it feeds me as a witch to only do that. I think it's good to read outside that section of the bookstore. You know, like it's good to read history. It's good to read, like you said, like plant books that don't have anything to do with witchcraft. They're just talking about plants or, you know, I think it's important to kind of step outside that to feed other ideas as a writer and as a practitioner.
It was very informative for me. As I said, I've written a garden column for a long, long time. And those are very direct. Usually you're talking topically about whatever's going on in the landscape of the garden or the woods or whatever, depending on the season. And to be quite honest, even in that genre, after a certain amount of time, there's not a whole lot new to write. You know, there's a way to grow tomatoes, and nothing has changed. Nothing is going to change in the way that you grow tomatoes. You might get an odd new variety or some version that you haven't grown in a while. And I had almost gotten to the point about 15 years ago where I said, you know, I need to let somebody else do this. And it wasn't until I started getting into the magical uses of the plants, which of course I was aware of, but I hadn't done a whole lot in depth on, that brought that back to life for me. I had to get into another mode of thinking. I could still use all of this information that I developed over 20 years, but it gave me a different way of looking at it. To be able to relate it to the spiritual practice. So, yeah, I think we do ourselves a disservice if we cut ourselves off from outside influences and sometimes even off the wall things that you never would have thought would have complemented your spiritual growth. But you read them and the light bulb goes off. Oh my God, this part of my practice makes more sense to me now because of this odd thing that I read just for enjoyment, just to be reading something.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's just important to feed that well with different things and see where things take you. Like I was joking with my husband, as we are recording this will come out sometime later, but as we're recording, it was the weekend of the coronation, which I did not watch, but I have watched some recaps of stuff.
Oh, yes.
And I'm not a royalist by any stretch, but I am to my husband, as much as I think the monarchy needs to go, as a person interested in history, I was fascinated by what they were doing. But I don't agree with them, but I still wanted to find out about it, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing to me that one of the arguments for keeping the monarchy in Britain is because of the tourism industry. They're a tourist attraction, for heaven's sake.
Yeah. For history nerds, basically, for history nerds.
Yeah, that's basically it. And people want to go and see the guard change, and they want to go to this castle because, like you said, you relate the history to it. It's amazing, and I don't know how I would feel like that if I was a royal. As I understand it, they have plenty of business interests to keep them occupied in addition to their royal duties. But I don't know how I would feel about that if somebody said I needed to hang around because I was a tourist attraction.
Yeah, I mean, well, and it was interesting. This has nothing to do with writing or anything or witchcraft. Maybe a little bit to do with witchcraft because I think it's hard.
We need to segue.
Right. I mean, I think it's hard to extricate, you know, the history of British witchcraft completely from British history. Right? They're all intertwined. But
they are.
Like watching the coronation, it was like because the previous coronation was, you know, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 70 years ago. And she was so young and those pictures look like history, you know, and in that way that old photographs and all of that stuff, you know, looks like history. And seeing this person who I've always seen on the news and, you know, in these royal, it just seemed so weird. Like it was just somehow not real and bizarre to see. It just was like, this is so strange to me that we're still doing this. Like, what century are we in, kind of thing. I don't know. It's just real weird. And kind of like the weird juxtaposition of, Charles and Camilla in these ancient regalia. And I don't know. It was an odd thing to see the pictures.
Did you see one of the pictures that floated around the internet it's not supposed to be Photoshopped. It's supposed to be a real picture. At some point they're shooting down King Charles is sitting there at his throne being coronated and blessed and everything. And suddenly a hooded figure with what is probably a staff and a long robe walks by in silhouette.
I saw that. Yeah. It was like, the Grim Reaper at the coronation. Yeah.
I thought, oh my God, I hope this man doesn't die in the next 6 months. We'll make a whole lot of hay out of that one particular picture.
Yeah. People will make a lot of hay out of that. Yeah. But it's just, I don't know. It's, what is the curse? May you live in interesting times. I mean, I feel like we're all kind of living that right now.
Chinese curse.
Yeah. I mean, who knows where it actually came from, but yeah, I was like, yeah, may you live in interesting times. I think we're all in the middle of that, but it makes writing interesting. I mean, there's never a dull moment as a writer, right? Everything feeds a writer on some level.
That's right. It's amazing. One of the stories or one of the articles I did for a local newspaper here, and it was just out of the blue because he said, write when you can write for us, because newspapers are always hungry for something to fill the pages up. And just out of the blue, I happened to notice, this is about almost a year ago, car drove by and it was a shiny matte gray. I thought, well, that's interesting. Somebody got to paint their car, so they just put a glossy coat over the primer. And a few days later, I noticed some more. I said, what is this matte gray that's so popular with cars? And like you said, it's just the fascination. And now you've got to go research. Mm-hmm. Is it just my imagination? Well, it turns out that matte gray is one of the popular colors. It's the third most popular now after white and black. White and black or silver and black. White and black or silver and black, one or the other. And the thing that is fascinating to me, tying into this interesting time we live in, is that gray is a color that you use to hide and to blend in. Mm-hmm. And so many of these people are buying these matte gray, primer gray vehicles. And it's almost like we're getting to the point in the country of trying to hunker down and say, don't pay attention to me. I'm just going about doing my own business. Don't yell at me. Don't shoot at me. Don't do anything. I'm just trying to get by. And I think it makes a powerful statement on the state of the country at this particular time.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I've been thinking that a lot about like this weird resurgence of the satanic panic stuff around witchcraft. With the, book burnings in Tennessee and other stuff that's happened. And, yeah, I mean, I came to paganism and witchcraft in the very early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, right? Like all that was culminating. Right. And it's like, I thought we'd done this, but apparently, we get satanic panic again, we get Nazis again, we're just doing the repeats, right? And I was like, I don't really want to do this. And I kind of liked being sort of out without really having to worry about it. And, and now I'm like, okay, so what does this mean for, I'm in California, I'm pretty safe, but like I worry about people who aren't in places where I feel like they're going to be safe being who they are.
Well, we still encounter that, and I'm glad to see. As I say, I get exposed to a lot of different people from the surrounding area. When I help my friend at her shop, we still get people who will come in, and they're in a group of several people, and there might be an older adult with them, and these people are 18, 25 years old, and people wander into her store not knowing what it is. They just think it's an eclectic store with odd things in it. They may figure out that it's a quote unquote witch store, and they may not. But then these younger people will slip out and come to the register and hand you something. It might be something with a pentacle on it. It might be a bumper sticker that has some witchy phrase on it. And they'll ask you to quickly ring it up and stick it in a bag so grandma won't see what they bought, because they don't want that drama. And there are still some areas in this state where you can't be terribly obvious about what your religious affiliation is without attracting negative attention. That's just so sad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a weird place to be in, and I kind of thought we were moving past that, and maybe we will eventually. I keep reminding myself that the pendulum swings, but right now it feels like it's swinging really hard the wrong direction to me. But
I wonder if that is the case, or if this is the anxiety and the angst of the people who are left in that group, who believe that, and it was true for the longest time, that they were in control. What they said went. And now they see that slipping away, and this is the desperate attempt to try to grab it and hold on to it instead of evolving into a compassionate mindset. I hope that's what it is, and that at some point it shakes out with these people to say, we can do our thing, they can do their thing, everybody just do their own thing, and we can all get along. I hope it won't get into the uber violence of what went on in Germany prior to World War II, where anybody with the wrong affiliation, political or spiritual, was in serious danger. I hope it doesn't come to that.
Oh, me too. Me too. Those are not interesting times I want to live through. That's for sure.
No, I don't want to enjoy that.
No. Well, not the best segue to make a segue on, but in the interest of time, no. Hey, there are no rules on this podcast, and I happily polish platforms and soapboxes for people all the time. But I did want to give you an opportunity to kind of plug what's coming up and where people can find you. And I will tell you when this episode's going to air, so you can think about that. It'll air at the beginning of August.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. And just let people know, what you're up to and where they can find you. And then we'll play our game of chance at the end.
Oh, my goodness. At the moment, I am writing a couple of articles for the Llewellyn Almanacs. As I say, I have made a proposal for the mechanics of magic that I hope Llewellyn will be interested in. I'm going to develop another small booklet, probably just will be self-published or distributed through local pagan shops, on Medusa. I'm intrigued with the interest in Medusa and how she evolved, and how people seem to be wanting to relate to her in this day and time. So my books are available through Amazon, certainly. They are available through Llewellyn, Llewellyn.com. They're available in most pagan stores. I've been very pleased that the Witch's Guide to Wildcraft continues to sell well. And hopefully people will be as interested in Under the Sacred Canopy. You can reach me through House of Akasha, GSO, on Facebook. I have a not very well developed webpage called roadsidemagic.com that you can try to reach me through. Again, not a very good techno-pagan, but that is certainly another place that you can reach out to me. I will be doing a presentation at Mystic South in July this year, again, related to the book and how to connect with tree spirits and relating to those in your own landscape. So got a full palette here.
Yeah, that's great. Well, awesome. So we'll put all that in the show notes for people to make it a little easier to find you. Yep. And then, so for our last question, I'm going to roll a die, and we'll ask you one of those things that, as Southerners, we know you're not supposed to talk about in polite company. You've got a question about death, sex, religion, politics, or money. And
I thought we pretty well covered everything but the sex.
Yeah. And then if I roll a 6, you get to pick which one you want. So we'll see.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, we'll get 5. Money. There you go.
Money.
Well, I think this is interesting, especially because you've been a journalist. I'm always curious, I think there is this myth that, we're all Stephen King, and when really just Stephen King and James Patterson are Stephen King. A few other people, so I'm curious, as a writer,
see the world, be a writer.
Yeah, really. So it's not like it used to be, right? So aside from like things you've done for free. Like, what's the least you've ever been paid as a writer for honest toil?
Nothing. Nothing. I have been paid nothing for writing. This was many years ago, and it was strictly for the exposure. One of the local newspapers had a habit of putting up just a banner across the top, and it was, 5 interesting gardening facts, and you had to write very, very tight, usually 20 to 50 words top. And the only thing you got out of it was exposure.
Mm-hmm.
There was no remuneration of any sort.
Was it worth it? Was it worth the exposure?
I suppose in a roundabout way, because that does, anytime you do something like that for any of the aspiring writers out there, you got to get a resume built up. You got to be able to say, I was in something. I got something out there. It's not quite the same today with the internet, where you put up your own podcast, you have your own rules, have your own parameters. Back in the day when I started, in particular, if you went to apply for a writing job, the first thing they asked you was, who have you written for? So in that sense, I suppose it did, because that gave me more credentials for the newspaper job I eventually ended up in and stayed in for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. That I could say, hey, I had this thing that I was doing. They already knew that I was doing a garden column for another newspaper, but that gave me 2 sources. At least the one that I was doing for the garden column for paid a pittance, didn't pay a lot, because gardening information tends to get relegated to the bottom of the budget pile. I think for a long time, the garden column was frequently written by the editor's wife or something.
For free.
You didn't have to pay her, so he didn't think he had to pay you either. Yeah. Or, it might be a cooperative extension agent, and he or she was getting paid by the state, so nobody expected the newspaper to pay them. As a matter of fact, it was in North Carolina, it was forbidden at one time. I don't know if it still is or not. I did know one particular cooperative extension agent who wrote and got paid under the table, but we're not supposed to talk about that. So. Wow. But yeah, that I have definitely written for free. As a matter of fact, I have a sticker, or I have one of those magnets on my refrigerator from the now defunct museum. It closed before I could get to it. Mm-hmm. And it says, I'm a writer, will write for food. So. Yeah. When I think I've told the story in the podcast, but I'll tell it again. When I graduated from college, my then boyfriend made me business cards that said unemployed poet. So. Oh, my goodness. Well, to be quite honest, how we all have aspirations coming out of elementary school. And mine was to be a writer, because I loved Mark Twain. I loved the idea that here was this room filled with books, and you could go and pull one. And here was this person who had written this thing, and it's 100 years later, and I'm reading his or her words. I absolutely loved it. And all the adults in my life were saying, "You won't do that. You're not going to get paid. You're not going to make any money doing that. You don't want to do that." So it took me 20, 30 years to get back around to the point where, I won't make a lot of money, but at least I'll make some. Yeah. And I actually ended up with a job writing for a living. There you go. It can happen. So that's right. Aspiring writers listening, it can happen. Keep the dream alive. Yeah. I mean, may we all strike lightning at some point. But if you don't, steady work can also at least keep food on the table. Exactly. So. You have to do some of the mundane things in order to get to the fun things you want to do. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, Janie, thank you so much for coming on. And I hope people will go check out your books. And I'm excited for this Mechanics of Magic book that might be coming. I love to write things. The Under the Sacred Canopy was probably a little bit of an indulgence, because I just love history and I love sharing those stories and things. I did include information on how to work with trees. But if we get to the point of doing Mechanics of Magic, that will be more like the Witch's Guide to Wildcraft, because it's practical information, rock solid. This is what you do. This is what you can expect. And some of your experiences will vary. But generally, for all of those people that I have coming in to the shop and saying, how do I, or how's it supposed to feel when I do one thing or another? This will help them to understand this is what you should expect. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and see how that one turns out.
Sounds good. Well, maybe we'll talk then.
That sounds wonderful. I'd love to. Appreciate the time, Victoria.
Thank you. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Julian Rashke. Our intro music is Cosmic Glow by Andrew Kay, and our outro music is Voices by Alexander Shanekar. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram at witchlitpod. Please help other witches find us by leaving a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to and reading WitchLit.